Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another episode of FPS Tips and Tricks. I'm going to be using a gameplay of gun game in CSGO for this episode because 1, it's my first time playing gun game in CSGO, and 2, there's a bunch of weapons that you have to use to win gun game, which I was totally robbed of in this gameplay, as you will see, but that totally ties into the focus of this episode, which is knowing your gun and playing to it properly. Now you can play however you'd like with whatever kind of gun you'd like, and these don't apply to every single player, and I'm not saying this is how you should play the game with these guns, but I'm trying to compare and contrast the pros and cons of each gun against all the other guns in the games. So, to start off with the probably most common weapon you'll see in FPS games, which is the good old assault rifle. The assault rifle is essentially going to be your jack of all trades. It has average range, average damage output, average accuracy, average rate of fire, and average recoil. This of course will depend on the kind of assault rifle you're using and the game you're playing, but for the most part, these guns are great for all of your mid-range and close-range engagements. They can fare well against SMGs in tight-knit areas, but they can also rival semi-auto marksman rifles from mid to almost long ranges. They're relatively easy to use and have a pretty high damage output. Having a higher rate of fire means you don't necessarily have to hit every shot like you would with a semi-automatic or bolt-action rifle, but having that perfect shot-for-shot aim definitely makes assault rifles 10 times deadlier. You really can't go wrong with these, and if you're relatively new to first-person shooters, I would always recommend starting off with an assault rifle, seeing as they're pretty good for any engagement and will help you learn the core mechanics of whatever game you're playing pretty accurately relative to all the weapons in the game. Next up, you're going to see a lot of submachine guns. Usually these will put out more rounds per minute at a lower damage per round than your assault rifle, with less recoil, better hipfire accuracy, but less range than an assault rifle, making them a lot more reasonable for an aggressive, close quarters combat type of playstyle. They're easy to spray and pray with, and a lot of the time when I use SMGs, I don't really aim down sights a lot, seeing as most SMGs have pretty accurate hipfire, and since you're going to be so close to enemies when you're firing at them, there's no reason to waste a few precious milliseconds with aiming down your scope. I would definitely recommend somewhat of a more aggressive playstyle with submachine guns, as you will usually fare better in close range engagements than most other weapon types. You'll have to be pretty up in people's faces to achieve that close range advantage that you don't really have with guns like assault rifles and marksman rifles and stuff like that. So next up, these guns go by several different names depending on what game you're playing, but you'll often hear them referred to as marksman rifles, or in a more general sense, just semi-automatic rifles. These are great for mid to long range engagements that assault rifles just can't pull off as well due to damage drop off at farther ranges. So whether you're counter sniping or pulling off wide flanks, semi-automatic rifles are always a great choice for a slightly more laid back mid-rangey kind of playstyle. Since you're definitely going to get blown away by most other weapons at close range, it's usually not a good idea to stay in tight-knit spaces with these kind of weapons, rather engaging from behind cover. You want to use your range to your advantage here, and I typically like to engage enemies from ranges where I know most people don't feel comfortable engaging a target with an assault rifle or a submachine gun. Since you have a lot longer range than assault rifles or submachine guns, and a lot less of a damage drop off, it's a great idea to engage from a more mid to long rangey kind of laid back undercover kind of playstyle here, where the assault rifles and submachine guns just don't shine as well as a marksman rifle. So next up is my least favorite weapon type, shotguns, and these guns have one sole purpose, and that's to blow you away from as close as possible with one shot, and you can't play long range with these, and you can't even play mid range with these. But what you can do is one shot anybody in a 10-foot radius. It doesn't matter what weapon the enemy is using. If you have a shotgun and you're within 5 to 10 feet, you're probably going to win the engagement, so stick to tight-knit corridors here. Stick to small rooms and stay inside cover. I tend to play a little less aggressive with these than I do with submachine guns because of the super limited range shotguns have. I know with a submachine gun, if I'm rushing an enemy and another one pops up, as long as he's relatively close to me, I probably won't be as too much of a disadvantage, but when I use shotguns, I tend to stick behind cover and hug walls a lot and try to isolate enemies as much as possible due to such a slow firing rate with shotguns. I know I'll be able to take on multiple enemies on one go as I can with like a submachine gun. Shotguns, you really have to pick enemies off one by one and use your super powerful close range capabilities to your advantage. You have a slow firing rate, so it's not a good idea to take on multiple enemies unless you really know what you're doing. It's a lot better idea to stay behind cover and isolate your enemies and just stick to super close ranges here. Next, I'd like to address your light machine guns because they're a weapon class that gets the bad stereotype of only being able to be used as a support weapon, only to lay down cover fire or suppress enemies, when that's really not the case at all with most games. They tend to have a really high damage output, somewhat slower fire rate, recoil it's a little bit higher but it balances out with the lower fire rate, and they're relatively accurate from mid-range, but where they differ from every other weapon is the giant magazine. I tend to treat LMGs as a slightly more aggressive marksman rifle, Where they really shine is that mid-range, laid-back playstyle where you can pelt enemies with bullets from right outside of the SMG assault rifle range, similar to a marksman rifle. And this is due to the slower movement you get from using an LMG. You can't really strafe or run around, which makes LMGs not that great for close-range combat, and they for the most part don't have the long-range capability to counter-snipe, but you can take down enemy after enemy spraying down an LMG from a tight corridor or from above ground. And since you move so slow, I would definitely use the map design to your advantage, try to get a height advantage, or just use really good cover you can just spray and spray down from. It's a lot better idea than trying to rush close range since you move so slow. It's really good to stay in that kind of marksman rifle, semi-automatic rifle range, and if you're taking on multiple enemies, you'll have no problem with a light machine gun since you have such a giant magazine capacity there. And last but certainly not least, I have to address sniper rifles, and this is where controversy comes into play, because it really does depend on the game and your playstyle. I'm not going to address this from a quick scoping perspective. It's only a minority of players who snipe, but if you want a separate video on quick scoping, definitely leave a comment below, and I will address that. Sniper rifles shoot super slow, too slow for the recoil to even matter. These are typically a 1 to 2 shot kill and have the best range out of any weapon type. Sniper rifles are your long range specialist weapons here. You don't want to be seen when using a sniper rifle, because if an enemy manages to get a flank on you or trap you in a close range situation, unless you're secretly a member of FaZe Clan, you're basically screwed. You want to pick off as many as you can from a safe long range distance and then get out of there when enemies start to notice you. You want to avoid close range engagements as much as possible and really use that range to your advantage, but realize you are vulnerable from anywhere that isn't long range. If you get in close range engagements, you're screwed. Mostly in mid-range engagements, unless you're really good at quick scoping, you're screwed. And you want cover and you want to remain unnoticed if you're long range sniping. So what I would do is find a good cover spot where you can see enemies at, preferably from a flank so you can get right on their side or right behind them. Pick off as many as you can and then get away from that flank position that you're sitting in, because once they start to notice you, people are going to start rushing up on you with assault rifles, SMGs, marksman rifles, all these things that can out DPS you from a close range. That's really risky if you're sniping, because normally a pistol's your sidearm, and a pistol doesn't fare all that well against an assault rifle unless you really know what you're doing. And those are all the common weapon types and how I'd recommend using them. If you enjoyed this video or if it helped you out in any way, I really would appreciate you dropping a like on the video. And if you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Tizzy out.